I literally listened to this story and I wept bitterly. I literally listened to this story. I wept bitterly. Honestly, black people have not only gone through a lot, but black people have seen it all. And that is why I keep saying, if every single thing that black folks actually go through, these people go through it 1%, I don't think a lot of them would have been surviving by now. And I'm happy that this is actually a white man exposing the deepest truths. And I want to say a very big thank you to this man because he took his time to do research and not even with a fear or a mind of bias to pull out this. I want you guys to watch this video. Watch this video from beginning to the end and let me know your thoughts. If it is very easy for every single black person to move on, let me know. If it is very easy for every single black person to keep quiet, I want to know from your honest opinion. Credit belongs to original creators of every single clips and stitches I have in today's episode. Subscribe, like, comment, and share, and let's dive right into this emotional video.
Hey everybody, Professor Moore here. So whenever I'm teaching an American history course, the lynching of Black Americans is one of the darkest and most upsetting chapters that I cover. It's almost impossible to imagine or comprehend the level of depravity and violence that was involved in these killings. And I honestly believe that when you bring an accurate discussion of lynching into the American story, you'll never be able to look at American history the same again. In order to have a factual and accurate discussion of lynching with my students, I've spent years researching lynchings, and I've read hundreds of accounts of lynchings from historical newspaper databases, and I would like to share some of the conclusions I found from my research with you. So, lynching describes the illegal murder of Black Americans by white mobs. There was no justice, no judge, no jury, no trial. This was public murder. But what were the reasons that the lynchers gave for these killings? How did they justify themselves? What were the supposed crimes that these Black Americans were being killed for? Now, during the time period, the lynchers often made the false accusation that they were killing an individual because they had assaulted a white woman. However, anti-lynching activist Ida B. Wells did her own research and found that this was completely false, and that in the majority of lynching cases, the only crime that the Black individual had committed was being Black in a white supremacist society. However, protecting white women continued to be a popular explanation for lynchings. For example, Caleb Gadley was lynched in Kentucky in 1894 for walking behind the wife of his white employer. Keith Bowen was lynched in Mississippi in 1889 for accidentally entering and then leaving a room where 3 white women were. General Lee was lynched in South Carolina in 1904 for knocking on the door of a white woman's house. Thomas Miles was lynched in 1912 for inviting a white woman to go have a drink with him. Jeff Brown was lynched in 1916 for accidentally bumping into a white girl as he ran to catch a train. Parks Banks was lynched in Mississippi in 1922 for having the picture of a white woman in his possession. In 1889 in Loudon, Virginia, a Black 14-year-old named Orion Anderson was lynched by a mob of white men. What was his crime? He was playing with a white girl and he put on a mask and he scared her and he was killed for it. In 1930, John Wilkins was lynched for smiling at a white woman on a train. Sometimes lynchings were the result of a Black American breaking some unwritten white supremacist rule. For example, Jesse Thornton was lynched in Alabama in 1949 for not saying Mr. as he talked to a white police officer. Some of the other reasons for lynchings were speaking disrespectfully to white people, arguing with a white person, insulting a white person, refusing to step off of the sidewalk to make way for a white person, or just standing around. It's clear that there never was any real crime associated with lynching. The crime that these people were being killed for was the crime of having black skin. So the next question becomes, who were the lynchers? And you might be surprised to learn that it was not racist terrorist groups like the Ku Klux Klan. Yes, those groups did kill black Americans, but they were not responsible for the majority of lynchings. So who were the lynchers? The lynchers were doctors, teachers, grocers, businessmen, lawyers, parents, children, police officers. It was the entire community that was participating in these killings. There was nowhere to turn for help. You couldn't go to the authorities because the police officers were participating in the lynching. You can see from this photograph, the caption reads, "Lynching in action. State troopers and citizens of Gordonsville, Virginia formed a posse of 1,000 which fired for 6 hours on the cabin of a 65-year-old Negro worker and his sister. They finally burned the hovel and both victims." It's ironic that when the bodies of lynching victims were brought to the morgue, they often wrote under cause of death, "Death at the hands of persons unknown." But that is a complete lie. They knew exactly whose hands had done it because it was the entire community. Just look at these mugshots from individuals that were involved in a lynching in South Carolina in 1947. All of the men in this picture participated in that lynching, and not a single individual was charged with a crime. Here's another article from 1943. The headline reads, "These men might ordinarily pass for decent citizens. However, all of these individuals had recently taken part in a lynching." And when people were asked to describe what these men were like, here's what they said. "These are some of the best men in the county. Men who are considered here to be the best representatives in the community of law, order, and justice. They called these men good Christians. They called them the best citizens." The lynchers were not seen as monsters, but upstanding members of the community. They were not treated as pariahs or social outcasts because everyone in the community was participating in these killings. The next point to emphasize is that lynchings were not spontaneous acts of violence that were committed in a fit of rage. These were organized, planned events that were attended by thousands of people. Usually a lynching victim was kept for a few days, sometimes in a jail cell or held in another location, and this gave the lynchers time to advertise the event. You can see here from this newspaper ad, the date, the time, the location of lynchings was widely distributed in order for more people to come and participate in this killing. And sometimes people drove across state lines. They would travel hundreds of miles in order to watch these murders take place. Lynchings were usually held on weekends, so more people could attend. However, if they were held on a weekday, all of the businesses would close down so their employees could go watch the lynching, and all of the schools would also close down. They would ring the bells, and all of the students would walk out in a single file, and their teachers and parents would take them to these lynchings. And when they got there, they would hear musicians playing music, and they would find vendors selling snacks and drinks. Now, these lynchings were not done under the cover of dark in the middle of the woods. They were done in public, in broad daylight, in the middle of Main Street, on the public square, sometimes even on the courthouse lawn. Now, if you look at this photograph, you would never know that these people are going to a lynching. These individuals are flocking to go watch a public murder take place in broad daylight in America. If you look at this photograph, you would never know that what these individuals are all straining to see is a lynching, the killing of a Black American. If you were to look at this photograph with no context, it looks like a carnival or a concert, and that is exactly the type of atmosphere that lynchings had. People were not ashamed to take part and to watch these lynchings. These were nights that these individuals wanted to remember. That's why usually during all lynchings, there were professional photographers that were taking pictures of the killings and turning them into postcards. And they were also taking pictures of individuals that were there that wanted to commemorate and remember this night. If you look at this picture and you see the faces of these individuals, it's very hard to imagine that just right off the screen are 3 young black teenagers that have been brutally killed. This is a picture of a lynching that took place in Florida in 1935. And this is a young girl watching an individual be killed right in front of her eyes. And I want you to look at her face and look at the smile on her face. The fact that a young girl could watch a black American be brutally killed right in front of her and then smile while looking at that dead body shows you just how much black Americans had been dehumanized. And it shows you how much white America was desensitized to this violence. To accurately tell the story of American history, this level of violence has to be brought back into the main narrative. We are never going to be able to move forward as a nation or a people until we finally deal with the legacy of this violence.
This is a story of unimaginable brutality and injustice. What I'm going to tell you is going to be hard for you to hear, and it's going to anger many of you. I'm going to tell you right now, this story does not have a happy ending at all. It's a story of nothing but pain and trauma and injustice. But it's a story that must be told anyway, because we have to make sure that those who suffered under the weight of oppression are not forgotten. This story represents what it means to be black in America. Jesse Washington was born around 1898, and he was the eldest of 12 children. He was described as being quiet and mentally disabled. In 1916, 17-year-old Jesse was working as a farmhand on the farm of George Fryer in Robinson, Texas, near Waco. On May 8, 1916, Chris Simmons was walking home that evening when he heard screams coming from the direction of the Fryer home. He ran to see what was going on, and when he got there, he discovered 22-year-old Ruby Fryer and her 14-year-old brother George Jr. He saw them staring at the lifeless body of their 53-year-old mother, Lucy Fryer. Her life had been brutally taken. After learning what happened, George Fryer, the husband, quickly drove to Waco and told Sheriff Samuel S. Fleming what had happened. Sheriff Fleming assembled a team of investigators and returned to the Fryers' farm to begin his investigation. The police immediately suspected 17-year-old Jesse and his brother William of being involved in this crime. Jesse and William had worked for the Fryers as hired hands since January of that year. Police went to Jesse's house and arrested his entire family. Everyone was eventually released except for Jesse. They kept him there to question him. Within hours of his arrest, Jesse was moved to jails in Hillsborough and then later in Dallas. The police told Jesse that they'd protect him if he just simply confessed to the crime. Believing that they'd keep him safe, Jesse signed a confession. Jesse's confession was published in all of the local newspapers, making it widely available and likely seen by any of the potential jurors. Because Jesse was illiterate and could not read or write the confession, he signed it with an X. Jesse's arrest and subsequent trial were really just a mere formality designed to appease the white community's demand for a swift and really harsh justice for Jesse. On Thursday, May 11, 1916, a McLennan County grand jury took just 30 minutes to return an indictment against Jesse for taking Mrs. Fryer's life. Judge Richard I. Monroe appointed attorneys for Jesse's defense and scheduled the trial for the following Monday, just a few days away. Jesse's trial was a complete sham. The court, the jury, and all the spectators were white, and the atmosphere in the courtroom was racially charged with hatred. The trial started at 10 a.m. The courtroom was completely filled with people from the community. Those that could not get a seat in the courtroom stood outside. As soon as Jesse was brought into the courtroom, one spectator pulled out a weapon and said that they might as well get Jesse right now. Someone else who was in the courtroom responded by saying that they should at least let the trial go forward and that they'd get Jesse before sundown. The trial lasted only a few hours. Jury selection took about 30 minutes. When the judge read the indictment to Jesse and asked him whether he pleaded guilty or whether he pleaded not guilty, Jesse was so confused he didn't even know what was going on. He simply said, "Yeah." Prosecutors called a doctor who testified about Mrs. Fryer's wounds, and he said that there was evidence that she had been violated. They also called the police officers who said that Jesse provided them with a detailed confession. Jesse's confession was then read aloud to the jury. Jesse's attorneys didn't put up much of a defense for him at all. They only asked one question of the prosecution's witnesses and opened and closed their case by calling Jesse as their only witness. The jury deliberated for just 4 minutes before finding Jesse guilty of taking Mrs. Fryer's life. As soon as the verdict was announced, the courtroom erupted into chaos. As the judge was writing down the verdict into the record, someone yelled to get Jesse. A mob then seized Jesse and dragged him down the stairs and out of the courthouse, where a crowd of hundreds were already waiting for them. They put a chain around Jesse's neck, and then they dragged Jesse. They dragged him all the way to City Hall, where another group had already assembled and started to build a bonfire. As Jesse was dragged to City Hall, his clothes were ripped, and he was stabbed, and he was beaten with shovels and beaten with bricks and clubs. Once at City Hall, Jesse was beaten some more, and stripped, and chained to a tree in the city square, a site that was chosen for its central location and visibility. The mob, which had quickly grew to include over 20,000 people, prepared to carry out their own form of justice. They were not going to wait for what the court was going to hand down for Jesse. Jesse Washington's lynching was meticulously planned. It was an orchestrated event. The mob cut off his fingers and stripped him naked. They then poured oil over his body and set him on fire. As the flames engulfed Jesse, he tried to climb up the chain to escape the intense heat of the fire, but his tormentors repeatedly forced him back down into the fire. The mob's actions were brutal and systematic. They involved cutting off Jesse's fingers and cutting his toes off, and his ears, and his genitals before burning him alive. The crowd included men and women and children, highlighting just how lynching was a community affair. As Jesse burned, members of the mob cut off parts of his body as gruesome souvenirs. Some onlookers scoured the ground for keepsakes, collecting bones and pieces of the tree. Jesse's body was then later tied to a horse and dragged through downtown Waco. At one point, during this dragging procession, Jesse's skull actually detached from his body. A group of young boys then took the skull and took teeth from it and sold the teeth for money. Jesse's body was then hung from a pole for the entire town to see. There are photographs of what happened that day, and I'm going to tell you right now, they are very gruesome, but they depict what happened. I can't show them here for obvious reasons, but you really should see these photographs. You should see what brutality looked like during this time period. See what black people experienced. I've included them on my blog. The NAACP sprung into action after this event. It wanted what happened to Jesse Washington to be a catalyst for change in terms of how black people were treated in Southern courts. It sent Elizabeth Freeman, an English suffragist and NAACP member, to investigate. Freeman was attending a convention in Dallas when she got the call from the NAACP. Her mission was simple. It was to investigate and to report the facts. Freeman went to Waco and she investigated what happened. She interviewed witnesses and she documented every gruesome detail. Her report painted a vivid picture of the brutality that Jesse faced and the complicity of local authorities who allowed this mob to act so freely. The NAACP published her findings in a special supplement of their magazine, The Crisis, which was edited by W.E.B. Du Bois. It was titled The Waco Horror. The report included graphic descriptions and photographs and exposed the savagery of what happened that day. Some have suggested that there's evidence that shows that Jesse might have taken Mrs. Fryer's life after he was tired of her berating him all the time. But to be honest, we don't know if that's what happened. We don't know because mob violence overtook justice and due process. Jesse never had a fair chance to defend himself or to present his side of the story. But his guilt or innocence should not be the focus. It's the brutality and the mob justice that Jesse Washington was subjected to that's the real injustice here. A 17-year-old mentally delayed child was subjected to unspeakable brutality and pain. Everyone came out to participate and celebrate it. And Jesse was not alone in this act of mob violence. Because what he went through, so many others also experienced this same mob violence during that time period. What happened to Jesse Washington is a powerful reminder of the brutal realities of racial violence in the American South. This history cannot be swept under the rug just because it's uncomfortable or some people don't want to hear it. These atrocities happened to real people in a time defined by racial violence, and we must talk about this. The same ideals that led to Jesse's sham trial and public execution are still present in our justice system to this day. Now, they take the form of stop and frisk and unjustified taking of black lives by police officers. They take the form of a death penalty system that disproportionately executes black people. They take the form of mass incarceration and unconstitutional policing and so many more other injustices that I didn't talk about. I want to know your thoughts on this video. Had you ever heard of Jesse Washington, and how did it make you feel knowing everything that he went through? Share your comments and drop me a comment down below.
Since it is the month of Juneteenth, I figured now is a relevant time to talk about lynching in America as a ritual of human sacrifice. So let's get into it. Here are the sources that I'm going to be pulling from: Berkeley Journal of Sociology, Lynching as a Ritual in the American South, Harvard Magazine, Lynching as Human Sacrifice, and the Southern Rite of Human Sacrifice, Lynching in the American South from Mississippi Quarterly. So we all pretty much know what lynching is in America, right? It was a form of racial terrorism that white mobs would inflict on black communities, not only in the South, also in the North, in the West, everywhere there were black people and white people, they inflicted this form of racialized violence and terrorism. So you can see the victim might be beaten, choked, or mutilated, and it was common for fingers and toes to be cut off and distributed to the crowd as good luck charms. Bloodstained clothing of bits of rope served a similar purpose. Family members of the crime victim often figured prominently there, being allowed the first shots at or blows to the prisoner. Disfiguration might continue after death, occasionally by dragging the body behind a vehicle. After the event, the body was generally left hanging or tied to a post to be cut down by the sheriff and delivered to the lynching victim's family for burial. Already we can see in these events them taking on a ritualistic nature by cutting off people's limbs, the rope, etc. for souvenirs. If you're a part of the true crime community, you know that serial killers will often take souvenirs from their victims, and it kind of serves the same purpose here, so that the people who perpetrated the crime against the person can have a reminder of what they did and why they did it. So here's some more. Some lynchings were grim events, but most seemed to have an almost festive quality for white participants. Onlookers cheered at each step in the process, shouting encouragement to the lynchers and epithets at the victim. Laughter and jeers greeted the prisoners' appeals for mercy. Spectators sometimes joined in the activity if the victim were shot or hanged, for example. Everyone present with a gun tried to get around in. Likewise, viewers enjoyed the scramble for mementos after a burning. For the whites, lynchings were community recreation as well as community retribution, and they formed the basis of local stories for many years afterward. So here's an account from someone doing an investigation after a lynching where he encountered some white children, and I'm just going to read it. 3 shiny-eyed, healthy, clean children headed for school approached me. As I neared them, the eldest, a ruddy-cheeked girl of 9 or 10, asked if I was going to the place where the N-words had been killed. I told her that I might stop and see the spot. Animatedly, almost joyously, as though the memory were of Christmas morning or the circus, she told me, her slightly younger companions interjecting a word here and there or nodding vigorous assent, of the fun we had burning the N-words. The animation and excitement of these girls bespeaks something ritual. Their delight does not spring from having seen justice done or from having successfully intimidated a competing group, but from participation in a community festival. White's invocation of Christmas and the circus hits close to the mark. A carnival atmosphere was common at lynchings, and the laughter and cheers that accompanied the torture and killing was one of the most shocking parts of the practice to Northern readers. Another indication has to do with magic. Rituals are often associated with magic, perhaps because both involve liminality and transition between categories. Accounts of lynchings often allude to magical associations. Souvenirs of the event, particularly those physically associated with the victim, were highly prized as good luck charms. As mentioned above, the end of the lynching often involved a scramble for fingers, toes, bits of rope, or links of chain. The magical power ascribed to these objects attests to the ritual character of the occasion. So here's another account of a lynching. In the presence of nearly 2,000 people who sent aloft yells of defiance and shouts of joy, Sam Holt was burned at the stake in a public road before the torch was applied to the pyre. The Negro was deprived of his ears, fingers, and other portions of his body with surprising fortitude. Before the body was cool, it was cut to pieces, and bones were crushed into small bits, and even the tree upon which the wretch met his fate were torn up and disposed of as souvenirs. The Negro's heart was cut in small pieces, as was also his liver. Those unable to obtain the ghastly relics directly paid more fortunate possessors extravagant sums for them. Small pieces of bone went for 25 cents, and a bit of liver, crisply cooked, for 10 cents. Such lynchings were a form of religious ritual, according to Orlando Patterson, Cowell's professor of sociology. In the wake of their devastating defeat in the Civil War, Southerners had to explain why they had lost. The South, as the most Christian part of the nation, felt that it must have committed some great sin for that bunch of feckless, effete Northerners to defeat them. Patterson, who argues that lynchings were often a way to cast out that sin, blacks themselves could not be literally cast out because their labor was needed. So some Southerners found the next best thing. You symbolically cast them out by ritually sacrificing them. So Patterson also asserts that 35 to 40% of the lynchings qualified as bona fide human sacrifices, serving the same functions that such sacrifices do in any society that practices them. Scholars have overlooked the religious significance of the lynchings, Patterson says. Fire consecrated the act. The sacrifices did not take place in previously consecrated places such as churches, but clergymen frequently incited the mob or joined in, and the sacrifice often occurred on a Sunday. Newspaper reports often noted that a collective hush generally came over the crowd at the moment of the victim's death. The awesome transition from life to death silenced even a murderous lynch mob. Symbolic cannibalism was also typical in such lynchings. Patterson says it often involves just smelling and going around with a piece of that person. If that's cannibalism, then what these people were doing was cannibalism, because they did go around with pieces of fried African American hearts and livers. Participants in the ritual would take body parts as ritual mementos and often adjourned to a common meal afterwards. So if you didn't know, there's also historical postcards of lynchings that were extremely popular for a very long time, and even now they're they go for tons and tons of money because they're considered historical artifacts. I mean, I don't know who's paying for them, but it is a thing. And by 2001, scholars knew that the actual poetic, graphic, even photographic images of crucified, sacrificed black men reflected a range of meanings. For crucifiers, the twisted, burned, or slashed body signified elemental justice, a necessary, even moral act in a drama of punishment and pain that portrayed good and evil in a way that could sacralize white supremacy, at least for the moment. Lastly, for those in charge of lynching, the body of the victim was transformed from a human being into a representation of what was supposed to be valued by the community. The actions inflicted upon the body by ritual performers enacted good and evil, order social divisions, debased the abject, and elevated the transcendent, imagined beyond the action itself. In 2001, an analysis of lynching photography demonstrated how photography simulated the effects of lynching as a ritual, becoming a pivotal step that affirmed and made manifest white solidarity and supremacy. Amy Louise Wood emphasized the ritual importance of lynching not as a form of fixed social solidarity, but as a pervasive, repeatable ritualization of power relations practiced on black bodies to assert, confirm, and celebrate white honor against threatened chaos and discord, and envisioning of which demanded constant replenishing in a performance that arrested the imagination. Lynching was that performance, and photography, Wood writes, played a crucial role in this performative ritual and the social roles it produced, making the rituals widely known and broadly engaged, far beyond the site of the original practice, and allowing time for a moment of reflection. Yeah, so now you guys know that lynching was absolutely a ritualistic practice among white communities in America. And I mean, I think it really demonstrates how generationally white Americans have been taught to act towards the pain and suffering of black Americans. Happy Juneteenth, y'all. Stay informed.
Rosewood, Florida. Another self-sufficient, predominantly black town, minding its own business, when a mob of white supremacists destroyed it. In a story that is painfully familiar, a white woman's false accusations led to the lynching of a black man. Over the first week of January 1923, hundreds of white men from neighboring towns hunted down black people and burned Rosewood to the ground. Residents were being murdered and set on fire. They shot back in self-defense until more white mobs, including the KKK, poured in. All of the surviving residents, men, women, and children of all ages, were forced to flee. hiding in their night clothes in the woods and swamps as they were hunted down. They were eventually able to escape by catching a train to Gainesville. Rosewood was obliterated and forgotten. In 1994, in a bill that was the first of its kind, Florida paid $150,000 in reparations to each of the 9 living Rosewood survivors. Rosewood descendants were also granted free college tuition to Florida colleges, for those of you who keep saying that reparations can't be managed.
Forget it. Move on. Forget it. We've gone past this. People suffered. People suffered lynching. People suffered a lot of things. Just for some of us that are surviving right now. Some of us wouldn't have had any histories if not from the sufferings of some of these people. And this is just a tip of an iceberg of the wickedness that black people went through. How do the generation of these people just forget it and move on? How did the generation of these people just pretend as if nothing ever happened? How will the generation of these people act as if it never existed? I don't know. I don't know. A lot of things that really went down were not even exposed. That is why you see that whenever you want to carry out a research, you have to go deep for you to be able to get what you are looking for. Just because why? A lot of things were swept under the rug. A lot of things were never exposed. In fact, if you give some people chances, they will prefer to bury every single thing. It's that bad. It's that bad. Generations of people have suffered. They've gone through a lot. And the only thing some people can say is they don't deserve reparation. Reparation is for the people that are enslaved. Yes, after all, they never experienced slavery. They never experienced it. So why do we need to be talking about it? So why do they need to be given reparation? God will so punish all of those people. God will so punish all of those people. To every single one of them that has contributed positively, negatively to the lynching of these people. And you know the annoying part is that is what is still happening. It is still happening. One of the palm-colored man confesses one of his video as a firefighter, and when I heard that confession, I was frozen. Where he literally said when they go to a place where they need to save people, they will first of all look who is there for them to save. If it is someone that actually look like me, they are not going to do anything about it or just act as if they are trying to rescue until everything just go down. But if it is not someone that look like me, they are going to try everything possible to rescue. And I ask these questions over and over again. What have we really done? Is it because we're trapped in this body called blackness? And later they will open their dirty mouth and say they don't see color. that we are one. These things have been happening for the past centuries, years upon years, and even up till now, it's still happening. It's still eating deep into the society. Their children are still inheriting their bad characters. Just imagine the story that just happened. That was this week. I didn't even bother to cover the story because the story was so touching and I feel so terrified. I was not even able to cover the story where a pregnant woman was stepped on by Jesus Christ. And you want us to just move on and act as if nothing happened? And act as if it never existed? And act as if what was happening then is not still happening now? You want people to just move on? Where you still have these white folks not teaching their young ones the good and the bad, not showing them the right direction of, oh, you don't need to do this, this is what you need to do. See everybody as one. And you want the black community to actually trust you? Why what we said for years, centuries is still happening in this 21st century? Let me know what you think. Credit belongs to the original creator. Very clips and stitches I have in our today's episode. If you haven't subscribe, like this video, drop me your comments. And lastly, do not forget to share. And yes, with no further ado, I'm going to be saying, man, I'll see you guys in my next one. Bye for now.